You're listening to Neurodivergent Solutions, a bite-sized episode of Divergent Paths, with me, Dr. Regina McMenomy. I'm here to drop one insight at a time to help you live, work, and lead with your whole self. No masking required. Today, I'm going to talk about a question I hear from my clients and have asked myself over and over again. But who am I without the mask? If that's where you're at in your unmasking process, my heart is with you. Like my full heart is with you. Unmasking is a massive transition. And in many ways, it requires you to undo threads that have tied you together for a long, long time. If it feels terrifying, that's perfectly valid and totally reasonable. So why does this happen? When you've been masking for like your whole life and you have been putting on a performance to look neurotypical, to look like you belong in like your family group, or you belong with your peers, or you belong at work, you've been making choices that are rooted in a need for safety and a need for having a sense of safety and a way of protecting yourself. Most of us don't really have a choice about masking when we first learned how to do it. There's very little choice in masking if your family does not accept your authentic self and you are reliant on them for your physical survival. Masking is a survival mechanism, and it is a learned behavior, but it is, and thankfully, because it is a learned behavior, it means it can be an unlearned behavior as well. High masking often leads to you performing instead of expressing an identity, you confusing people-pleasing with your personality, where you think caretaking is part of who you are, and caretaking not in like making sure people in your life are fed and housed, if you have children or you have elderly parents or whatnot, but caretaking in terms of like trying to manage other people's emotions and their responses in particular to you. High masking leads to losing touch with your inner wants and desires, the things that are important to you and things that you value. A lot of times people who are really high masking are never encouraged to ask the question, what feels right for me? They're just expected to go along with the people in the group they're trying to belong with. One of the things that was the most surprising for me was how much grief I felt when I started dropping my mask and when I started breaking apart who I performed as versus who I am authentically. There's a lot of structure involved with a masked identity. There's a lot of structure involved in building your identity so that you belong with a specific group of people. And letting go of that feels like free falling. It feels like you are losing control of something that has shored you up and kept you safe for most of your life. And the grief that came with that, the grief of recognizing that I was going to have to change many of my friendships, that I was going to have to change how I interacted with the world, that I was going to drop things that I thought were really part of who I was and weren't. Like that was sad. I was sad, and I am still sometimes sad about pieces of my life that are missing, that I can't go back to because I can't mask myself enough to be safe in certain environments. And that idea of who am I when I'm without the mask on is a prevalent one I've had my clients talk about, that I've had my friends talk about, that the people I work with are struggling with. So the mask was part of helping you survive. So I have kind of a silly example to share here, but one of the things that I learned to embrace in dropping my mask was my love of pop music. And I'm talking about like very silly, lighthearted, music that, a lot of people at a lot of different times in my life would roll their eyes at me because I loved pop music. I love learning about new music. I love listening to new music, which is not something that a lot of people carry. There have been, studies done of many people developing their musical identity in adolescence and never really leaving that. So if you think about your uncle who is still focused and a huge fan of the Rolling Stones or of, the Grateful Dead or something like that, where who would have been an adolescent when those bands were big. That's what I'm talking about. People who don't leave that behind. I was always changing my musical identity. I was always looking for new music to listen to and appreciating new artists. And it's one of the things that has really bonded me with my, preteen, is letting her find music and introduce me to it, and then me wanting to listen to it, which has been a really powerful means of bonding for us. But I always felt silly saying how much I liked pop music because I felt like it wasn't serious enough and people wouldn't take me seriously because I liked pop music so much. And I have just shed that. I will lean into it. I know K-pop Demon Hunters is the big thing right now, but that is music that just fills me up. I get so much joy. I love that movie, but I love the music just as much. I just saw And Juliet with my daughter, and if you are a fan of any kind of Broadway, it's a jukebox musical, and it was amazing, and I have listened to the soundtrack of that more times than I care to count at this point. And it's, pop music from the 90s that was made into the musical. That's what a jukebox musical is. But the soundtrack just brings me so much joy. But I didn't come to that immediately. That wasn't my first thing on dropping my mask. I'm oh, hey, I love pop music. It took some reflection for me to get to a point where I started realizing that I found so much joy in music and so much joy in pop music that was really something that was a core piece of who I am, of who I feel good. I feel good about that. And it took a lot of time for me to recognize how much joy that brought me. So one of those questions I encourage my clients, and I would encourage you to listening to this podcast, is where do you feel joy? Where do you feel that unbridled joy where you're just I really enjoy this? Think back about things that maybe you abandoned that you enjoyed as a child. Did you love drawing, but you decided not to go to art school, so you stopped drawing? We don't have to capitalize on things that we love. So if you gave up drawing or gave up singing or some sort of artistic expression that you really liked, did you give up a fandom because you felt like it was too immature? What are some things that brought you deep joy that you felt you had to give up through your life for whatever reason? What sensory experiences do feel good to you? What do you enjoy? This is going to sound kind of odd, but I really love being in windy environments. And I know that's kind of, different, but I grew up near the Pacific Ocean, in the San Francisco Bay Area, and it was very foggy and very windy where I grew up. And I love being in the wind. There's something about the sensory experience of being where it's windy. I love going to the coast in winter for that reason. I love a cold walk on the beach. I know people love the beach in the sun and, summer, and I enjoy that as well. But being in a cold beach, even if it's raining, I love that experience. What are some sensory experiences that feel really good to you that might be a little different than what's expected behavior? You're not supposed to be out in the wind and the rain. You're not supposed to like that. I love walking when it's cold. I hate walking when it's hot and it's sunny. And I'm really wanting fall to come. And I want cold mornings so I can go for a walk in the morning when it's cold out. So another question you might ask yourself as you're trying to figure out who you are without your mask is, what opinions do you hold when nobody is watching? What are things that you really like? Do you have a show on TV or a movie that you'll only watch when you're alone? That you won't watch if somebody else is watching, that you would never suggest to watch with your friends or with your friend group, but you will enjoy it by yourself? That's another clue as to something that is an unmasked joy and an unmasked piece of who you are. The last question I'd tell you to think about is, when and where and with whom do you feel calm and present and playful? Now, I'm going to repeat that. When and where and with whom do you feel calm and present and playful? For me, I lost playful. I lost fun. I lost teasing. I lost like teasing is another thing that we might talk about later. But that playful drive for connection where I laugh instead of getting irritated. Like a lot of that went away, especially when I was in the depths of burnout. But when I was masking, I didn't feel like it was okay to be playful. I didn't feel like it was okay or acceptable to want to horse around or make jokes or things like that. And I really curbed a lot of my humor and a lot of things that I really enjoyed, and a lot of ways I really enjoyed engaging with people because of that. So think about that. Where do you feel like you can be playful? Where do you feel calm? Where do you feel like you can be present in the moment? And as much as we want to think about unmasking as this big moment where you just drop it and all of a sudden you are this bright shining star who you were always underneath, that was not my experience of unmasking. And my clients and my friends talk about how it's a lot slower and it's a lot more subtle and it's a lot more subdued than this dropping a cloak or taking the mask off or watching the mask shatter. It's a lot less that and a lot more this slow process of kind of you slowly returning from black and white to color, maybe to moving into a vibrant life that's filled with that joy, because you start in slow steps, recognizing where it is, what the connections are that you need and why it's important. So don't worry if you're not feeling like you could just drop it all of a sudden and it become, this unmasked version of yourself. If it takes a little longer, there's nothing wrong with that. So it is totally normal that it's going to take some time. If you've spent a lot of time, the longer you've been masking, the longer it's going to take probably for you to figure out your joy and figure out those places where you feel peaceful and calm and present and playful. It's really okay if it's not a linear process, if it doesn't go in a straight line, because that's probably a lot more authentic. If you slip into it, if you fall back into it, if you are in a stressful situation and your mask comes back up, that's totally normal as well. So, think about that too. So if this resonated with you, I talk a lot about masking in my newsletter, which comes out on Mondays. I'm calling it Nerd Notes, Nerd standing for Neurodivergent Education Resource Discussion. I share a lot of my stories, some reflections on neurodivergence, and strengths that will help you find your preferences and your people. So sign up at my website at divergentpathsconsulting.com, and there's a link to directly sign up in the show notes. So until next time, stay regulated and stay curious about who you're becoming.